labor and radicalist perspectives are issues that are influenced by so many externalities, and it's uncertain to what degree how this can be controlled directly by Indonesian feminists. I don't see how then the only limited quota of politicians in Indonesian feminists that will be directly having conversations with other politicians will be directly able to control all of this diverse perspective within all over Indonesia, and how then suddenly the radicalism that they want to post it about will be just suddenly tempered. I don't see the mechanization of this likelihood at all in opening government. In my case, I will bring about two issues. Number one is about Indonesian feminists. Number two, I want to talk about why the political, why the insider strategy is just not visible. The first is about Indonesian feminists. I think that the way we debate this motion, because we're talking about privatization, we have to talk about how we justify resource allocation, in which I think there are three metrics. Number one is about vulnerability, the second is about inclusivity, and the third one, the most specific about Indonesian feminists, is how we maximize the consistency of our movement. The reason why UU-TPKS can be actually pushed into actual UU, because it is a consistent movement that has been propagated for 12 years, in which I think this must be the approach that has to be consistent within the internal feminist movement. How do we gain all the power in Indonesian feminists? I think that one, through our growing communities of all over Indonesia. Number two, funding grant from international NGOs or even from the members in itself. And third of all, the trust of internal members that requires two things. One, full transparency of all these discourses that is, as the fiat of the motion said, this will not be the case in internal strategy. But second, I think that in governance side of the house, politics has an inherent bad reputation among Indonesian feminists, exactly because all of the characterization of patriarchal politicians, which means that internal feminist member has hard time to trust even the politicians themselves. This is important because participation is symmetrical to the consistency of the movement, which is what is the prioritization of Indonesian feminism itself. So how then community participation exists in opening opposition? You see that Indonesian feminist is not a single entity of only one voice, like what Uji has shown to be just only one radical thing. I think this is just a harmful label if we just focusing to label ourselves as a radical movement. We think that in Indonesian feminists, there's a lot of local approach that integrate with like local values, like how, for example, in Nusa Tenggara Timur, the way you solve child marriage is also through the local culture, or even you integrate with religion, like for example, Komisi Ulama Perempuan Indonesia that does progressive interpretations of religions that is also accessible even within outside of the patriarchal value. I think that this is the best way opening opposition to manifestation of cases that we can still push for political change, like what UU-TPKS did, but even if in the worst case, protection and progression can still happen outside of politics, and that will be done bottom up. But even if in opening opposition you end up excluding politicians, that's fine, because we're protecting feminists from uncomfortable conversation and tiring sessions inside this strategy. That's why in open opposition, what you get is that we do collectively in quantity. That's why there will be a feeling of safetyness to go down the march, for example. And this will not exist inside of opening in government bench, because you're excluding a whole lot of your community to be able to just go to the parliament and before the opening.
Do you think that resolution of child marriage in Eastern Indonesia would have been better if national politicians are expected to weigh in because it becomes national discourse through confrontation?
I think that's the burden of government bench to prove, because why then suddenly if you're mechanizing to incentive strategy, that is something that can eventually be solved, because at the feminist in our side of the house, through the local cultures, for the local culture integration, for example, you're doing a bottom-up awareness for slowly making the community realize how harmful the child marriage is. That's why the bottom-up progress will still exist. Second issue, why the visibility of incentive strategy is not possible. The first thing I want to talk about is the Olympics of prioritization, because in politics, you will have two things. One is the prioritization, because there's a limited budget, limited space to discuss all other things. And secondly, you also need to always arrange these formal meetings every single time, which means that the inherent thing that will exist in their side of the house is a prioritization that will be limited. But even if you want to say that prioritization is not exclusive, at the very least, in our side of the house, because we characterize to you that Indonesian feminist is not a single entity that is also incredibly decentralized. It can actually be covered in a lot of subgroup communities that exist in our side of the house. But what in the system in opening opposition in government bench is inherently accommodative. Number one is we tell you the barrier to entry. Becoming a politician, creating political party in Indonesia requires so many bureaucracies. For example, like you have to gain like 1,000 members from all the provinces, like almost 40 provinces in Indonesia. I think that the a voter base. No, thank you. You need to become a voter base, which I think that is also possible, because the populist narrative that currently going on in Indonesia is that feminism is still not seen as populist in comparison to any other issues, like the economic issues, the defense issues, or whatever. But more than that, I think that in the current status quo, women is unfortunately still being represented in a very symbolic way in the parliament. Because we're getting a women that are just very much like artists, like I'm not gonna draw the name drop, but they are not definitely representing feminist issues nor policies even in the parliament. So I think that even in the best scenario we have women representation that will be accepted in the politics, it will be not as integrated as adequate as we want to be. But more than that, I think that the consolidation and lobbying will also still follow the prioritization and efficiency of logic that is happening within the current regime of the government, which I don't think this is something that will happen. So I think that in government bench, you have to accept that if you really want to push your issues to be accepted with the politician, you have to do two scenarios. Either you will have to compromise that will put you just into a pedestal of secondary society all over again, or you have to be aggressive anyway to push the agenda to the surface. Which means that if you say that feminists are radical, you will still be labeled as aggressive anyway, which means that it will be a zero-sum game in opposition bench. But even if you want to say that exactly that this is needed to counterbalance patriarchal politicians, I think that this is just not feasible, because mindset change is hard, and as the perform, you are going to lose in amount of quantity in government bench. But even if you can do that, I think there is no guarantee of success that feminism will succeed with their agenda, which means that if feminism will fail in their side of the house, it will create internal conflict, because the representation will get blamed anyway, and it will just not be a problem we're proud to.